The term video nasty originates in the UK from the early 1980s and describes a category of horror films considered to be obscene. They were separate from X-rated films released in the cinemas, although they have some overlap, and mostly referred to films that went straight to video, bypassing the British Board of Film Censors due to a loophole in the legislation, allowing them to be released unedited and uncensored to the home markets. It all began before that, however, with the Obscene Publications Act of 1959. This was the first update on the subject in almost 100 years, as 1868's R. V. Hicklin established the precedent of what was obscene previously, with no exceptions for intent or artistic merit. Throughout the 1950s, there were attempts to reform the laws, both to establish more modern standards and types of media, and to allow for more balanced reading of works, with a single scene or idea no longer rendering an entire whole obscene. The Act itself has 4 parts. Section 1 defines something as obscene if, taken as a whole, such as, to tend to deprave and corrupt persons who are likely, having regard to all relevant circumstances, to read, see, or hear the matter contained or embodied by it. In other words, won't someone think of the children? Section 2 outlines how publishing obscene material is a criminal offense, for profit or not. Section 3 deals with search and seizure, allowing police the ability to grant warrants on reasonable grounds and remove objectionable materials. Section 4 provides a defense for the accused, as if they can prove a work is created for the common good, it can be allowed. The open-endedness of the Act, and harsh penalties including fines and jail time, initially made many distributors hesitant to release their films in the UK. Eventually, however, the uptake in other regions and size of the market became too great to ignore, and sales soared, especially of low-budget horror pictures. The presence was met by an equally strong resistance, helmed by Mary Whitehouse. She was a British teacher and conservative advocate. A fundamentalist Christian, she was deeply offended by the change to society in the 1960s, especially the hippie culture promoting drugs and sex. In 1965, she founded the National Viewers and Listeners Association, NVLA, an advocacy group created to fight the rise of objectionable content in popular culture at the time. They arranged protests, attended Parliament, and conducted letter-writing campaigns, all with the intent to remove the material entirely. Due to the NVLA's actions, a number of prosecutions happened, on both sides of the filmmaking process, creators and distributors. These first occurred in the late 1970s, but picked up enormously during the early 80s. While the general definition of obscenity had been put into law, it was still very much decided on a case-by-case basis. What was acceptable not only changed over time, but also came down to individual districts or even police officers. Raids on shops seemingly happened at random, and there was a general lack of confidence in the market as a whole. This wasn't helped by Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government, which began in 1979 and was viewed by many as a nanny state, heavily influencing what behavior was allowed. The public outcry against horror began to increase with the 1982 UK release of The Driller Killer, a 1979 film. Its distributor, Vipco, took out full-page ads depicting its explicit cover in a number of sensationalist magazines, hoping to attract controversy. This resulted in many complaints and some prosecutions. Shortly thereafter, Go Video wrote a letter anonymously to Whitehouse, complaining about the film Cannibal Holocaust, which they distributed. Immediately thereafter, Her and NVLA ramped up their efforts and got papers with national distribution like the Sunday Times and the Daily Mail on their side. These films were blamed for an increase in violence among the youth, as well as delinquency and in general antisocial behavior. There is of course no evidence to support the conclusion. While in interviews many students claimed to have seen films that were regarded as obscene, they would also claim they had seen titles that didn't exist when presented with false titles. Just like Penny Dreadfuls, Universal Monsters, horror comics, violent video games, or TikTok, it was simply another medium blamed for behavior that has existed since the beginning of time. While there was an increase in crime during the 1980s, it wasn't media to blame. It was largely due to Thatcher's policies causing increases in unemployment, poverty, and a reduction in social welfare. Combined with a heroin epidemic, the country was in a worse place than the previous decade, but it wasn't Jason's fault. Eventually, the Video Retailers Association took action, insisting on better guidelines from the Director of Public Prosecution on what was and wasn't acceptable. In June of 1983, they released the first public list of what has been termed video nasties. The list was modified on a monthly basis as new films were discovered or prosecutions failed against films that were already on the list. In total, 154 films appeared on there, but there were 3 different levels of severity. The first, called the Final 39, were those that remained on the list for its entire lifetime, and anyone who distributed them could be prosecuted, including jail time. The Dropped 33 are those for whom prosecutions failed or were viewed as likely to fail, and thus charges were dropped, and thus they were removed from the list. While distributors couldn't be indicted, the material could still be searched for and seized. The others were classified under Section 3, and while again the films could be removed, as long as they were freely released, no charges would be levied. There were a few broad categories that these films could be sorted into. The first were those that depicted real violence towards animals, like Cannibal Holocaust or Friday the 13th. This was perhaps the only justified reason for banning a film. It was also one of the only reasons cuts would be made to them, even released directly to VHS. The second category was those featuring violence that was viewed as excessive. This often involved dismemberment, evisceration, decapitation, or other extra-lethal depictions. Tied to this is cannibalism, which was often enough to get a film added on its own. Fourth is what can be dubbed Nazi-sploitation, a subgenre featuring Nazis or concentration camps. Finally, sexual violence was often a case for removal. Of the final 39, the most famous are likely the previously mentioned Cannibal Holocaust and The Driller Killer, but also the most well-known rape revenge films like I Spit on Your Grave and The Last House on the Left. Many of the films on the list would be re-released in the 90s and early 2000s with cuts, and in the mid-2010s uncut. There are still a few films that have never been distributed, including Gestapo's Last Orgy and Blood Rights. The dropped 33 are generally lower profile, with The Evil Dead by far being the most known and popular. Others like Death Trap or The Toolbox Murders attracted some attention from genre fans. One inclusion on the list that probably shouldn't be is Tobe Hooper's The Funhouse. A fairly traditional slasher with relatively minimal blood and gore, it's speculated the title they were attempting to ban was The Last House on Dead End Street, an earlier exploitation film which was originally released as The Fun House, 2 words. It featured characters making a snuff film and was shot to look like one, as well as depicting rape, blackface, torture, and bestiality. The Section 3 films, with 82 titles, had many mainstream entries like Friday the 13th, Dawn of the Dead, Prom Night, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Thing. While these were not illegal to sell in the same way as others, it still demonized the genre as a whole, and many tapes of them were seized and destroyed. In an example of the Streisand effect, in many cases that made the film more desired, because they were forbidden, feeding into their popularity rather than curbing it. This attention was what caused Graham Bright, an MP, to put together a bill in 1983 that would become the Video Recordings Act of 1984, which came into effect in September 1985. In summary, all tapes from that point would have to go through the British Board of Film Classification and accept any cuts they made or be unable to be sold. It also required all previously released films without ratings to be resubmitted within 3 years or they would be barred from sale. The most famous film this happened to was The Exorcist, which was removed from British retailers in 1987. The idea of the video nasty was relatively short-lived, with the term originating in 1982 and effectively being removed with the Act in 85. There was still an impact in popular culture, however, with the punk song Nasty by The Damned celebrating the banned films, and 2021's censor depicting the aftermath, with a member of the BBCC descending into madness due to work and life pressures. Horror has always faced issues with censorship, by the very nature of the genre. Attempting to push boundaries, discuss subversive topics, and on a fundamental level, scare people, will always come against what some people refer to as decency or morality. Despite these obstacles, art has won, and coming back to the original laws, the concept of the public good is paramount. Horror continues to grow year on year, and shows such sights that have never been seen before, and is all the better for it. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you thought about this video, and the concepts in general. And as always, be well.